Hey, welcome to Worship Tutorials. This video was originally uploaded to our second gear-focused YouTube channel called WT Tone. Link for that is below. Go subscribe if you haven't already. In that video, I showed you how to take a tube amplifier, like one of these, and a universal audio aux, or you can use any kind of a load box device that gives you a direct output. And I showed you how to take that and put it into your amp modeler. Line 6 Helix, Fractal Axe-FX III, anything like that, anything with an effects loop. I showed you how you can insert a real tube amp into it so you can use the best of both worlds. Tube amp, amp modeler, put them together, the results are awesome. I took my Bogner Duende tube amp and I did just that. I put it into the effects loop of both the Helix and the Axe-FX, and I played the same thing so you can kind of compare how both of those two things work and sound. Check it out. Alright, so let's talk about how we're taking our amp, in this case the Bogner Duende, and we are packaging it up in a way that allows us to insert it into the signal chain of our digital modeling unit of choice. And to do this, we are using the universal audio aux. Now the aux does all kinds of awesome things, but probably one of the more important things that it does, if you're going to look into one, is it allows you to plug a tube amplifier into it. First, it receives the load from that, so you don't have to then plug it into a cabinet, although you can. But it does digital cabinet and microphone modeling. Sounds really, really good. And then it gives you a direct output, or stereo, mono or stereo, that you can then send anywhere. So the way we are doing this is we're setting up a signal chain in both the Axe-FX III, which is what you heard first, and then the Helix, which I'm going to show you as well, where there's basically an effects loop, a send and return. We're sending the signal into the front end of the Duende. It is then plugged into the universal audio aux. The aux is running out, just a straight line out, right back into either the Axe-FX or the Helix. So this is my setup for the UA aux. You see I've created this preset called Bogner Duende. The aux is so cool. So I'm not going to go into what all you can do in the UA aux right now, but I'm using a 112 cabinet with the greenback Celestion 30-watt greenback speaker, which is the same type of speaker that's in the Bogner Duende, and I felt like it really sounded great with that amp digitally as well. I am miking that with a Shure SM57 and a Royer 121. The 57 is off axis. Both of them are panned right up the middle, so I can take either the left output or the right output, and I'm going to get the same thing. I'm going to get the blend of both microphones. If you brought this back in stereo, which you could do on either unit, you can pan those in the aux, and you could get that stereo panning if you wanted to. That would be a cool way to go as well. All right, I'm using some of the room mics that they have in the aux, which is something that sets it apart from what you can do with just regular old IRs. You can do a lot more. I'm applying an EQ in the UA aux. You can see I'm pushing a little high end, and I'm also employing their awesome sounding 1176 compressor. So what I'm getting is sort of this polished studio recording type of a sound. I'm compressing my signal going in at the beginning of my chain, which kind of like tames the highs and lows of the playing, if you will. But it's sort of, it's pretty mild compression. This is also mild compression, but I like to use multiple layers of compression, like when I record, and I feel like it works really well when I do stuff in this digital realm. Also, now the aux will let you put delay and reverb on your signal. I'm not doing that here because delays and reverbs are being handled by the Axe-FX and by the Helix. Let's now hop into the editors for both Axe-FX III and for Helix. I'm going to show you how I set this whole thing up. The signal chain is sort of all encompassed inside of either Axe-FX or Helix. Signal goes into it, then it goes around, then it comes back in, and then it goes out. So I'm recording out of either Axe-FX III or Helix via XLR into Universal Audio Apollo. All right, so the first thing is into the unit, it then hits a compressor. In Axe-FX III, I'm using this JFET compressor. JFET is like an 1176 style compressor. In Helix, I'm using, they don't really have an 1176 style compressor. I do like the Deluxe Comp though, it's a Line 6 original design. I'm sure it's based on something, I'm not exactly sure what. But in both cases, I have compression set right around 4:1. I'm doing, you know, like a 80-ish% on the mix. So both of them are basically doing, and I kind of set them up to have the same level of gain reduction. There's a pitch effect in both of these. There's modulation, chorus, and tremolo in both of these, although they are in different places. But that's the basics of it. Now I'm using two overdrives in this example. I'm using a Timmy and I'm using a Tube Screamer. The first thing I did was sort of match the settings, which worked for the Timmy. It sounded about the same on both units. That would be this one on the Axe-FX and this one on the Helix. So you can see that the bass and treble, which in both cases act as bass and treble cut, by the way. They don't tell you that in Axe-FX, but in Helix they do. And the gain and the level is close. It's a little different in Helix, but I matched them first by matching the settings, and then I matched them by ear to kind of get them sounding the same. The next drive I'm using is an 808. I set them up so they sounded the same. Now you will notice that the settings, as you can see it on the screen, in Helix are different than in Axe-FX. I think both of them make great sounding Tube Screamers, digital or otherwise. Next thing we hit is a volume pedal, which is just mapped to expression, whether it's, you know, external expression pedal or on the Helix. And then we hit the send it out and bring it back in. Now this is where things got a little different. So in Axe-FX you have 4 sets of inputs and outputs, and they're all stereo. So it allows you to be a lot more flexible because you can do different things with them. But I would argue it's not quite as easy to use if you want just a straight send and return. So what I've done is I have set output 3 to be my send. And I'm only sending output 3L, the left side of that output. And that's what's running to the amp. So basically I have a cable that goes from the back of my Axe-FX III, and it just runs right into the front of the amp. So it's sending that level to the amp. Now I had to do a little bit of tweaking and testing, unplug from the Axe-FX and plug straight into the amp to make sure that the gain staging was exactly the same. And I ended up having to push the level I was sending to the amp by 3 dB to get it to be about the same as if I just plugged straight into it. Your mileage may vary depending on your setup, your amp, what you have to do. So we're going out 3, the left side, out 3L to the amp. Then I'm taking the left output of the aux, the line out, bringing that right back into the Axe-FX via input 4L. So all we've really done here with this out and in is just created an effects loop. We've sent the signal to the amp, sent it from the amp to the aux, from the aux back into Axe-FX. Now, Helix accomplishes this, in my opinion, much more elegantly, much more simply. The back of the Helix actually gives you 4, sends and returns, which you can then pull up via the send and return dialogue here, and they can be mono or stereo, which is really cool. I'm using the effects loop 1, which uses send 1 and return 1 in the back of the Helix. I did, in my testing, notice that I didn't need to adjust the level of the send. It just sounded exactly like I was plugging into the front of the amp when I turned everything off in front of it. From there, we're hitting some reverbs and delays, and some modulation. But in this case, I'm using a analog stereo quarter note delay for Axe-FX, and I'm using a tape quarter note delay. So there might be a little difference there. I could use an analog delay, but I like the way both of them sound in both units. This isn't a scientific test to determine which one of these is better or worse. It's just having some fun. And then I am using a cloud type of reverb in both cases as well, because I felt like it fit the little musical piece that I came up with. So for Axe-FX III, I'm using the Stratocumulus cloud verb. For Helix, I'm using my personal favorite, the Glitz reverb. I actually love that Axe-FX reverb as well. Maybe I like it more than the Glitz. I don't know. I'll never tell if I do. All right. And then it goes out via the XLR outputs of both units. So that is how our signal is going through the digital modeling units, out to the amp, through the aux, back into the digital modeling units, and being recorded in Logic through the Apollo. All right, so you heard it in the beginning. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play you this little piece. I'm gonna record it once using the Axe-FX. I'm gonna record it again using the Helix. I'm gonna try my best to play them exactly the same way, and then we'll come back together and wrap this whole thing up. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. Couple questions for you if you're watching in this video. One, did you really hear a difference in the tone between the Helix and the Axe-FX? Now, the amp and aux component of both of those systems was exactly the same. It was all running through the same thing. So really the difference is going to be in the way the Helix and Axe-FX model their effects, the way their drives sound, the way their reverbs and delays sound. What did you think if you listen to them back to back? So another question I would have for you is if you had this type of a setup, if you had an amp, a tube amp that you really liked, you had something like a UA aux or a 2 notes Captor X or something that allows you to get your amp direct out so you can put it back into the digital realm. If you had something like this, plus you had like a Helix or an Axe-FX, would you go to the trouble to, like if you're playing in church or you're playing a gig or something like that, would you go to the trouble to lug all that stuff around when you could just model the amp, you know, or use one of the amp models in the Helix or in the Axe-FX or whatever it is that you're using? Do you think it's worth it? The answer that I have to that question is it could be worth it, yes, if you really love playing tube amps. Now, the Bogner Duende is a somewhat unique Not that well-known amp. Nobody models it, probably because nobody wants one, because nobody's really heard of them. It has flavors of Marshall and Fender in it. I really love the way it sounds, so there's nothing that gets quite that sound in Axe-FX or Helix. Am I married to the sound of the Bogner Duende? Not really. I picked it up recently because it's an amp that I've always wanted. But it's not like I would miss it if I were playing, you know, one of the excellent amp models in Axe-FX or Helix. I don't think personally I would miss it that much, but if you have an amp that you love, or if you just love interacting with a real amplifier, then I think it's worth it for you, because really the bottom line here for us as guitar players is to play what inspires us. It doesn't matter even as much what sounds the best. Really what matters the most is what inspires us to play the most and what brings the most out of us as guitar players. So if an amp does that for you, but you want to experience the convenience of the digital realm as well, like setting up scenes and snapshots to get different sounds, then I say lugging all this stuff around is 100% worth it, whether you're going to a gig or church, whatever. Especially when COVID is over, when we can actually do these things again. And if you haven't really explored doing this, hopefully this video, and if you have an amp, hopefully this video has inspired you to try and get creative with your signal chain. If you have an amp and you have something like a Helix, you can get the Torpedo Captor X is a really good option, and it's somewhat affordable. It's way more affordable than the aux, but it doesn't do as much. So the Universal Audio aux, of course, is just, I love it. That's why I bought one. But there are other options out there. Even something like a Mesa Cab clone. I used to use one of those, or Coke LB, like a load box. Those things don't sound too bad, and you can probably get them really affordably. And it'll let you really get creative with the equipment that you might already have and love that you don't use that much anymore. Hey, thanks again for watching. Subscribe to Worship Tutorials and to the new channel WT Tone, link below again, where you can see that to get more gear content like this and more videos to help equip you as a worship leader, as a worship musician in your church. See you next time. Bye.